Welcome to the Skoll.org Forum on Social Entrepreneurship, live from Oxford, England. And we're talking now about storytelling and its capacity to accelerate social change. And I'm really delighted to having with me on the sofa here, Holly Gordon, your Chief Impact Officer at Participant Media. And before joining that, you set up Girls Rising, which is really a global campaign to enable all girls to have an education. And in fact, Forbes named Girl Rising as the #1 most dynamic social initiative. Previously, you were head of content at Tribeca Film Festival, and actually you were trained as a journalist with ABC, so we're fellow comrades in arms there, which is fantastic. And Participants' mission is to create entertainment which compels and inspires social change. Now, those are really great, highfalutin words.
Big words, right.
What do they mean in practice?
What they really mean in practice is taking great filmmaking, great storytelling, and connecting it to the leaders who are making change around the world on whatever the issue might be in the storytelling to create change. So a great example might be Spotlight, which told the story through the eyes of journalists of the Catholic Church. And
the story, can you tell our viewers who might not have seen it?
So it was about the pedophilia scandal in the Catholic Church, and it was based in Boston on reporting that the Boston Globe had done. And this was a narrative film, so a fictional story of that experience. Mm-hmm. And it broke open what has now been a decade-long investigation into the church and a great deal of change.
So how did Participant work to create impact around that movie?
Well, actually, that one's a bit of a different kind of impact because when you think about how you create impact, you have to think about where you are on an awareness spectrum, right? So if you're breaking a story like a journalist, mm-hmm. you're very, very, very early in the awareness spectrum. Mm-hmm. And I would say another film that many of the viewers might remember is An Inconvenient Truth by Al Gore, mm-hmm. right? Which was an awareness spectrum spectacle around mm-hmm. climate change when it came out in 2006. A better example of the kind of work that I do would be a campaign that we've just finished with Indian Nobel Prize winner Kailash Satyarthi, mm-hmm. who won the Nobel Prize the same year as Malala. And Kailash has been working all around the world to end child labor. And so we partnered with Kailash, we made a film about his life, and then we partnered with him, and we've been screening that film at parliaments and in schools all around the world to both change policy on child labor and to engage young people in making generations of change.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because on one hand, you're an entertainment business and you have that in your whole mission. And the other hand, you're creating social impact, which some people might see as kind of worthy but dull. How do you bring those two together?
Well, that's the magical formula. And that's really where Jeff Skoll, who's the founder of Participant, had an incredible vision, which was creating what we call a double bottom line company. So one bottom line is that we try to make money with our movies. And the way you make money with your movies is you make them commercially entertaining. But before we greenlight any project, we have to assess whether or not it has a social value. And so unlike other production companies in Hollywood that just greenlight something that's just entertaining, we have this special question we ask, which is this a story that needs to be told because it tackles one of the world's biggest problems? And if we say yes, we start production. And on my side of the house, the second bottom line is how are we then going to create impact with this story? And so at the greenlight process, part of it is a question about is it going to be commercially viable? And the second part is how are we going to make impact?
First question, when you're looking about making impact, what are the criteria you're using when you're making that decision?
So we have a set of 6, and I'll just tell you a few of them. So one is how big is the issue? Right? How many people does this issue affect? If it's child labor, if it's the abuse in the Catholic Church, if it's the rights of domestic workers in our most recent film, Roma. These are big, hairy problems, right? So the bigger
wicked
the
problems, as people like to say.
So the bigger the problem, the more likely we are to want to make a film about it because our films reach audiences all around the globe. The second question that you really need to ask from an impact perspective is how does it leave the audience feeling? Because if a film leaves you feeling depressed and despondent, you're not actually inclined to take action. Mm-hmm. And so we tend to build campaigns around films that either point towards a solution or leave you feeling compelled to make change.
And are you tracking that emotional journey that the viewer has when they're watching the movies? Do you work with brain scientists to actually kind of research how people respond to the movie?
Great idea. No, we're more Luddite than that. We sit in a screening room
and say how you feel.
That's right. We read scripts. And so at the greenlight process, obviously the film's not finished. And so we read a script and you get a sense. If it's a documentary, you have to wait and see. So then we see early cuts of films and you can pretty much tell.
How can you tell? How do you know what other people, especially across the world, how will they will be responding emotionally to movies? Because that's all culturally specific.
It is and it isn't, and that's how you see breakout hits that are made in Hollywood but resonate around the world. Because what's really interesting about storytelling as a tool for social change is humanity is humanity. We love, we are fearful, we want the best for our futures. And so the compelling human tale often transcends borders, time zones, languages, etc.
And do you think that certain emotions like fear, they're said to stay in our mind more because when we were on the savannah, we were worried about the tigers. Whereas the good news about having some berries is great, but it's not going to stop us from dying in quite the way that the tigers will kill us.
Well, I would twist that a smidge, which is to say that certain emotions like fear and anger are very activating, but they're often short-lived. And a good one that often do-goody films fall into is the trap of evoking guilt. Guilt is an incredibly transactional feeling. So if you're making a film that makes an audience member feel guilty, they might donate, like, okay, here, make this stop. But they probably won't change their lives to get involved in the issue you're trying to solve. However, if you make people feel hopeful and inspired and a sense of possibility and connection to something bigger than themselves, they will jump in and they might actually even change the trajectory of their lives.
That's really exciting. And have you heard of people who've changed their trajectory of their lives after watching your movies?
Absolutely.
Give me an example.
An Inconvenient Truth is a perfect example, and my best friend is a great example. So she now runs a business that's focused on climate change initiatives, changing schools to be more sustainable. She will tell you that she did that because she watched Inconvenient Truth. But more broadly, we've made foods like stories like Food Inc. It's changed the way people eat. My film, Girl Rising, I travel around the world. I bump into people who changed their majors, who changed their jobs, who took actions that they would never otherwise have taken because they were inspired by the story that they saw on the screen.
But it's more just than the story on the screen, because you're interested in following up, so people who may have seen the movie are also more able and are prompted to be engaged in different ways. Can you tell me a bit more about that?
Yes, so we think about our work in three ways. One is we want to inspire, so that's the quality of the content which we've just discussed, how it leaves you feeling. The second is we want to empower, and that's a word that's thrown around. What does it really mean? We want to give people tools, pathways, and opportunities to get involved. And so any one of our impact campaigns leans into that. What are the tools? What are the pathways? How can we help people get involved, either using technology or sending them to a website or volunteerism? And then the third is connect. Social change happens in groups. I would much prefer you watch one of our movies with a friend or a few friends. Why? Because when you see content together and you're animated to care about something bigger than yourself, it makes a difference that you saw that with other people.
In what way?
It's psychologically, you're more likely to stick with a commitment that you make with others.
Okay, so you watch it together and then you talk about it and you discuss how your lives relate to it.
That's right, and how could we get involved with this? And that's amazing, and this is how it made me feel. What about you?
And that's why you offer a lot of screenings, particularly to specific communities.
Well, I was going to say, because there are two parts of Connect, right? One is Connect, just I'm telling you to watch things together. So that's, I hope, social science that you'll take home with you when you next decide to watch a piece of content that you think might have a social message. Bring someone. But secondarily, one of the things that content can do, like few other interventions, is that you can screen it for a parliamentarian or the head of a parenting group. They will both receive that content in the same way because they're human beings. They might not otherwise have connected on that issue, but now they are actually connected. And so what we try to do is we try to create communities from different stakeholders and ecosystems. Now I'm using buzzwords, but who can use the the release of these $1 million films to actually create momentum around the thing that they're trying to change.
I really want to draw a picture in a minute together about how these type of media can impact social change. But before that, I wanted to ask you a question that I've just been thinking about. You talk about the sort of definition of good and social impact as one that's a total consensus.
Yeah.
But people have very different ideas about what social good is.
100%.
Is this Jeff Skoll's idea? Is it your idea? Who defines what is good?
You know, that's interesting. So one of the things I did as I joined Participant about 1.5 years ago is I started watching a lot of the movies. And I wanted to find out, I wanted to discover what the movies had in common. And what I found is that our movies have in common, they're about courage, courageous people. They evoke compassion, about love between people and understanding other people. They are creative, all of them, and they all seek to connect the individuals in the story to, I've said this before, to a vision of progress and equity that doesn't exist today.
So again, I'm trying to sort of really get a handle about progress, equity. Those are kind of great abstract words.
Yeah.
But what kind of vision, what kind of social change specifically?
So,
if you were a politician, where would your policies be going towards?
Well, policies are divisive, right?
But
there are many roles. So we think about how do you create a more sustainable world of peace and prosperity. Right? So that's a big vision. More sustainability, peacefulness, and prosperity.
But prosperity for who? And how?
Equity.
Equity meaning, do you want everybody to be equal? I mean, all I'm saying is that these are so broad, these concepts, that people can kind of read into them, you know, I'm just trying to get a handle.
So one of the things that I would say is someone like Malala, we made a film about Malala. He named me Malala. Not everyone can be Malala, but I think everyone knows the difference between fair and unfair, right? And what we're looking for is more fairness in the world. And so what our stories...
So that means equality of opportunity.
It means
that your life
It means
outcomes.
equity. And equality and equity are different, right? Because you can be equal. So if you walk into a hospital and you are bleeding out from a gunshot wound and I broke my arm, equality is that we get the same care. You're going to get a sling for your gunshot wound and I'm going to get a sling for my arm. But equity is, oh shoot, you need more help, I'm going to give you more help. Now we are in a complex moment in our world today. We're in a questioning things like the structures of our democracy, the structures of capitalism, the future of our systems, our education system, et cetera. And I think that the human evolution is always one to reach towards equity, to reach towards progress. So yes, would I like a world where there's not such a gap between have and have-nots, where everyone has access to water and healthcare? I would. And that's the sort of vision we strive towards. And I think you have to have a lofty vision if you are trying to make progress. So that's progress with my lens.
Okay, that sounds good. Let's draw that so we can understand it a bit more. So we're talking about media and you're using film.
Yeah.
So should we...
Story.
Yeah, story and...
So what I would say,
I'm having a go, but
what's that?
drawing. What?
Oh, so you're drawing to that. So I would actually start with, you don't start with a film.
Okay.
You start with, well, you would start down here somewhere, but you first start with, well, actually, that was going to be a brain, but now I'm going to make it into a community.
Okay.
Right? You first start with people.
Yeah.
Right? Human beings and a journey that human beings go on, because any narrative is a journey. And the way you turn a human being experience into a film is, this is where I'm going to make a brain, is creativity and imagination, right? And creativity and imagination is the basis of any art, including filmmaking. And so the creative and the imagination process then turns into the film.
Okay.
Right? And then, just as you started with community, when you come out the other side, you are in, you want to then project that to communities. And what I told you is it matters that you see things with people, right? So this is, in my sort of impact speak, I'm actually stealing this from my friend Amy Lowe from Emerson Collective, I just met yesterday, because it's so easy. She says, okay, so what's the what? This is the what. This is the what that you turn into a movie. This is the so what comes in here. So what? After these people are saying, so, here, this is their thought cloud. So what do I, so what? Okay, now I get it. And then the last piece of impact is is now what? Which is, this is what we need to do next.
So
right?
this is action.
So my job, so the director's job and the film team's job is to turn the story into the narrative that moves, I forgot, this is really important.
They're hearts.
These are hearts.
Yeah.
So moving, as upside down, moving the hearts of the people here to care and to get them to ask, now what? Not to get them to turn away and feel guilty, say, now what, I want to go away, this is too much for me, but to say, now what, how can I be part of the solution?
And what's interesting is you're not just using movies, although you are also, you're also using different medium to engage audiences,
like
aren't you?
Facebook Live.
Yeah.
But
TV,
digital, television, podcasts, we have a short form arm, but also grassroots organizing. Right? Every time we make a movie, we are partnering with the communities who represent the leaders in the space that our films touch. So with Roma, we worked with the National Domestic Workers Alliance. We made the film, I'm trying to think of international titles.
So it's also when you're actually making the movie, so you have this idea, this story, which comes from people and what's going on with their lives, that you think and you add creativity to make it something imaginative and compelling. You're creating it for these various media, and probably a combination of them quite often, in order to create impact. And so where does working with, for example, the alliance you were talking about who work with domestic workers?
So in here, so this is community building. Oh, you should do it because you're facing the right way. But we start talking to them here as we're understanding what the narrative, what issue areas the narrative is going to touch, and then we community build here so that they actually reach their communities first, because for any piece of content, because they're all issue based, there are leaders in this space who've been working on this the subject matter area for years and years and years. For example, we made a film called Human Flow with the artist Ai Weiwei. And we worked with a UK organization called Help Refugees that had been set up in the wake of the flood of refugees into Europe. And Help Refugees are actually the people who are delivering service to refugees on the ground. So our partnership was with Help Refugees, and they used Human Flow to attract more donations and more visibility and more parliamentary support for their work.
So here we are. The green ones are the different organisations you're partnering with in order to create this change. Go for green. And it's working with them.
It's working with them and really lifting up their work. It's saying to them, listen, we're storytellers, but you're the advocates and the professionals. So and this is really why I ultimately made Girl Rising, because as a journalist, I knew how to tell a story, but all these nonprofit organizations are not actually allowed to spend money on telling their story because it would give them a terrible charity rating. But in fact, if you told a high street shop that they could only shout to the people who happened to wander by or host little get-togethers in living rooms to raise money, they would be out of business very quickly. So the use of story and in other words, advertising for the good work that they do was filling a gap. Sometimes journalists do it, but other times third parties do it. And so we're a third party there, which is where we're telling stories that are millions of dollars in the making, but can really accelerate change.
And what's exciting is they can reach so many people because they're so popular.
That's right. Because they're commercial, they reach millions. And when the more people you meet, the more people you reach, you go from, there's a theory of change, which you go from, oh, I believe this, now we believe this, now we start behaving in a different way, and ultimately we'll change our rules to have that codified. A great example. I believe smoking is bad for me. Now there's all this messaging that's telling me now we believe smoking is bad for us. Therefore, we're not going to smoke anymore, no matter how drunk we get. And then ultimately, you can't smoke in public places anymore, right? And so that's the sort of theory of change, and it all is about the human condition and interactions and changing what we believe.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. What a pleasure to talk to you. Holly Gordon, thank you so much from Participant Media. And coming up in 20 minutes, we're going to be talking about the rise of social enterprises in Latin America. Looking forward to see you then.